When Helen Keller was born, she was just like any other healthy child. She began to speak her first words at 6 months and to walk when she was a year old. But when she was 19 months, Helen was struck with a terrible illness that may have been scarlet fever or meningitis. When the fever had passed, she had lost her sight and her hearing. The doors to the world had been closed. She was left alone in silence and darkness. During the next few years, Helen's life was purely governed by her sense of touch. She was unable to communicate with anyone who did not know her. Helen learned to signal for her mother, but she flew into rages when she was not understood, and was in many ways a wild child. Her parents were advised by friends and family to put her in an institution, but they refused to give up hope. When Helen was 6, her mother read a travelogue by Charles Dickens called American Notes, which described a deaf and blind child who had learned to communicate using a kind of tactile sign language. Encouraged, Helen's family consulted with specialists, including Alexander Graham Bell, the inventor of the telephone, because he too was working with the deaf. Bell met with Helen and recommended the Kellers contact the Perkins School for the Blind in Boston. One of its most recent graduates was Anne Sullivan, just 20 years old and herself sight-impaired. When the Kellers hired this young teacher, the direction of Helen's life was about to change. Sullivan decided to live and work with Helen by herself in a cottage on the Keller family estate, in order to gain enough trust and authority in Helen's mind. Finding the way to reach Helen took stamina and patience, but Annie Sullivan ultimately helped Helen make a breakthrough. Holding Helen's hand under the flow of cool water from a pump, Annie repeatedly made the hand signs for W-A-T-E-R into the palm of Helen's hand. Suddenly, into Helen's world of darkness, the meaning of language became clear. In later years, Helen wrote of this moment. Once I knew only darkness and stillness. My life was without past or future, but a little word from the fingers of another fell into my hand that clutched at emptiness, and my heart leaped to the rapture of living. Once Helen understood the elements of language, her appetite to know led her to Braille, to reading, to study, and to writing her own ideas. Her curiosity, imagination, and ability to think and reason evolved rapidly. With Anne Sullivan's assistance, Helen pursued formal education at the Horace Mann School for the Deaf in Boston. Helen Keller's story soon became widely known. One of the most famous of her supporters was Mark Twain, who encouraged his friend Henry H. Rogers, a Standard Oil executive, to help finance Helen's college education at Radcliffe. On June 28, 1904, Helen Keller became the first deaf and blind person to receive her bachelor's degree. Anne Sullivan was her constant companion, spelling lectures into her hand, transcribing, and teaching throughout her educational journey. Soon after Keller's graduation, Anne Sullivan married John Macy, a Harvard instructor, literary critic, and prominent socialist. With editorial support from John Macy and the ongoing dedication of Anne Sullivan, Helen Keller published an autobiography called The Story of My Life. Though Anne Sullivan's marriage to Macy ended when he left for Europe to pursue his socialist career, Macy, too, had played a role in shaping and developing Keller's political understanding of the world. Keller researched the causes of blindness and soon came to the realization that disproportionate numbers of women forced into prostitution by desperate poverty became blind when they contracted syphilis. Helen became a champion of the poor and an advocate for the socialist distribution of income that she believed would protect them from this fate. Advocating for the poor and the rights of women, Helen became a suffragette and helped to found the American Civil Liberties Union. A leader and a political radical in her day, Helen Keller published over 14 books during the next 6 decades and wrote articles that challenged the public to redefine their image of the disabled. A lecturer and writer, Keller continued to work closely with Anne Sullivan until her beloved teacher died in 1936. One of Keller's books paid tribute to Sullivan and their years together, titled Teacher. Over the course of her life, Helen Keller worked with world leaders to champion the causes of social justice she passionately believed in. She met with various United States presidents and received many awards for her work, including an honorary degree from Harvard in 1955 and the Presidential Medal of Freedom awarded by President Johnson in 1964. Her work for the American Foundation for the Blind and her lifetime of advocacy for deaf and blind people in over 39 countries continue to give her life an ongoing legacy.